Your badge isn't scanning. The words hit me like a brick wall as I stood outside the executive conference room, my conference room, 2 minutes before the biggest meeting of my career. I stared at the blinking red light on the badge reader, blinking right along with it like an idiot, while the receptionist avoided eye contact and the security guard hovered nearby, radio in hand. Inside that room, behind that glossy walnut door, sat a $280 million deal that I had cultivated, cradled, and carried through 2 fiscal years of legal landmines and logistical nightmares. And I was locked out. 9 years. That's how long I'd been the firm's go-to problem solver. 9 years of smoothing egos, massaging budgets, interpreting legalese like it was a second language. I didn't think outside the box. I built the box, and then I painted it beige so no one would feel threatened. That's the kind of employee I was. Steady, dependable, invisible in the way corporate loves women to be invisible. If you're still listening, pause for a sec. Go ahead, smash that like button, and if you enjoy watching a quiet, competent woman unleash strategic hell on her idiot bosses, hit that subscribe button too. We're just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when the golden boy tries to play chess with a queen who designed the board. Back to the moment. I stepped back from the badge reader, my stomach twisting into a cold knot. I hadn't received a calendar update, hadn't been told the meeting had moved or changed. This was the quarterly review with Zenith Core, the client we'd been wooing into a cross-platform product expansion that would triple our regional revenue. I had 3 briefing books in my bag, 2 custom decks, and the meeting plan down to the minute. So why was I outside, locked out like some lost intern? Through the glass wall, I saw Brent, the CEO's personal protege, smiling like he'd just discovered how to use a stapler. He was seated in my spot, gesturing like a game show host as he clicked through slides I recognized as mine. He looked like confidence bottled in cologne and condescension, giving the room a TED Talk no one asked for. I didn't make a scene. I just turned around, walked to my desk, and sat down in the ergonomic chair I'd paid for with my own Amex because the budget hadn't approved it yet. Then I opened the internal calendar system. The meeting had been changed to executive level only. No notification, no flag, just a quiet little update buried in the metadata. My name was still on the project, still listed as lead liaison, but I wasn't in the room. This wasn't a fluke. Brent had been circling the Zenith Core deal for months now, sniffing around like a frat boy trying to steal someone else's science fair project. He'd slink into status meetings, ask redundant questions with dramatic flair, and then forward my emails to the C-suite with little summaries like, FYI, here's how we're positioning this. The only thing he'd contributed was a list of synergy phrases he thought we should bake into the pitch. Things like digitally frictionless and cross-market immersion. One time he suggested we change the term user interface to experience portal and gave himself a literal round of applause. And I nodded, took notes, and kept my head down. Because that's what gets rewarded in companies like ours. Not brilliance, not consistency. Just the ability to let mediocrity talk over you while you quietly do the work. It hadn't always been like this. When I first joined, the company had been a little messy but full of promise. I'd helped design half the governance structure during our messy first merger, stayed up till 2 a.m. tweaking client engagement protocols, and onboarded our biggest international partner during a hurricane, with a VPN powered by a backup generator and a glass of boxed wine. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because it mattered. But somewhere along the line, the applause stopped. And Brent arrived. He was shiny, polished, the kind of guy who says value prop unironically and orders sparkling water, because flat makes me sad. He was fast-tracked, MBA'd, and connected. His uncle was on the board, and he let that fact hang in the air like cologne. The CEO loved him. HR adored him. Legal tolerated him. I watched him attach himself to the Zenith Core deal like a remora on a shark, smiling and nodding his way into meetings he didn't understand and conversations he had no business leading. But I didn't push back. Not directly. I documented. I observed. And one night, 2 weeks before they locked me out of that room, I pulled up a contract from 5 years ago. A minor clause in an old joint acquisition policy that had sat untouched for years. Authored by yours truly during a late-night compliance review when everyone else was arguing over lunch receipts. Joint Authority Protocol, Clause 9.3.4. I reread it, then reread it again. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I'd won anything yet, but because the trap was familiar. And this time, I wasn't the one about to fall into it. 3 days after the badge incident, I was invited to a quick sync with Brent and the CEO. You know the type. No agenda, no context, just a calendar invite dropped like a landmine. Title: Alignment Chat. Smiley emoji in the notes. The room was windowless and airless, one of those off-brand conference boxes with a flickering light that buzzed just loud enough to feel like a threat. I walked in and immediately clocked 3 things: Brent's obnoxiously symmetrical smile, the CEO's fake concerned eyebrows, and, most telling of all, a third chair at the end of the table occupied by someone I didn't recognize. She wore a neutral pantsuit and clutched a legal pad like it was her first communion. "Jennifer," Brent said, like we were long-lost prom dates. We just wanted to touch base on the Zenith Core momentum and discuss forward motion for the org. The CEO chimed in with his signature mix of vague platitudes and carefully curated buzzwords. "You've been incredible. Seriously, no one's questioning your value." Every time someone starts a sentence with "no one's questioning," I mentally brace for the guillotine. I sat down slowly. The woman at the end of the table offered a brittle smile and said nothing. No introduction, no title, just presence. Brent leaned forward like a camp counselor about to confiscate my snacks. "We're looking at a team restructuring post-Zenith Core," he said. "New energy, streamlined workflows. You know, the works. That said, your contributions have really set the stage for what's possible. We want to make sure you're part of the transition, just maybe in a more behind-the-scenes role." Translation: You've built the engine, now go sit in the trunk. I kept my voice even. "Could you define behind the scenes?" The CEO jumped in, palms up, like he was trying to catch invisible butterflies. "Not a demotion, just a recalibration. Your skills are foundational, but Brent's bringing a lot of cross-functional agility to the table." Cross-functional agility. I've heard bowel movements described with more dignity. Brent gave a solemn nod, like he'd just delivered a eulogy. "It's a win-win. You get to focus on structure. I handle client-facing. We both play to our strengths." I stared at the wall clock behind them. Tick, tick, tick. Then I looked at the woman with the notepad. She hadn't written a single thing, but she was watching me like I was a frog about to leap out of a pot. "I see," I said, folding my hands. "And is this already decided?" "Nothing's set in stone," Brent replied, which meant it had been etched in blood last week. I left that room smiling like a Stepford wife with a migraine. By the time I got back to my desk, the HR portal had a new document waiting for my signature. Performance Improvement Plan. Effective immediately. 4 pages long. Keywords included rigid communication style, defensive posture, lack of collaborative enthusiasm. No mention of the $280 million I was about to land. No mention of the 5-year compliance framework I wrote that their entire merger playbook was still using. No mention of the literal international travel I fronted with my own damn credit card when finance forgot to authorize the booking. Just unapproachable. Difficult. My favorite line? "Jennifer is encouraged to consider shadowing Brent's external meetings to learn adaptive tone strategies." Shadowing. After 9 years, I was being asked to stand behind the guy who still said ATM machine and PIN number like those weren't redundant. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't go to HR because, let's be honest, she was already in the room. Instead, I printed the PIP out, slid it into a red folder, and filed it neatly beside a much older, much dustier folder. The one labeled JAP Clause. I opened the document, reread my own annotations from half a decade ago. It was dry, precise, obscure. A clause I'd slipped in during a governance overhaul, back when no one was paying attention because someone accidentally double-booked 2 CFOs to the same budget reconciliation, and legal was on fire. But it had survived. Clause 9.3.4. In the event of administrative or employment separation during active client negotiation, all authorized binding signatory rights shall remain vested in the original lead, until bilateral ratification occurs between both parties or governing board override. Layman's terms. You fire me mid-deal, I still hold the pen. It required no announcement, no legal filing. It was baked into the client-side protocol, signed by both legal teams back when Zenith Core's mergers were messier than a toddler's lunch. The beauty was, no one remembered. Except me. I leaned back in my chair, clicked the HR portal closed, and began phase 1. Not retaliation. Not yet. Just preparation. Because if they were going to treat me like I was disposable, they were about to learn what happens when you throw away the user manual and forget the machine knows how to reboot itself. The next morning, I brought Brent his damn cappuccino. Oat milk, 2 pumps of vanilla, lukewarm, just how he liked it. I even added a smiley face to the lid. He looked up from his phone like I'd handed him a puppy trained to recite the quarterly earnings. Thanks, Jen. Teamwork makes the dream work, huh? I nodded, teeth clenched behind a perfectly corporate smile. Anything for the team. That's how you survive people like Brent. You play dumb. You let them bask in the illusion of their own genius while you quietly slip out of the spotlight and into the shadows, where the real weapons are stored. I spent the rest of the day being the world's most cooperative PIP recipient. I attended every coaching sync, scribbled affirmations in a company-branded notebook, and even sat through Brent's client empathy simulation, where we role-played rejection scenarios. He made me pretend to be a toothpaste brand losing shelf space at Walmart. I wish I was kidding. Every time he opened his mouth, I imagined him standing at a podium 3 months from now, red-faced, sweating through his blazer, being asked a very simple question. Who is authorized to sign this contract? Because I already knew the answer. I'd spent the night pulling down archived governance documents from the server. The old stuff, back when we were still 2 companies fumbling through a merger. Most of it was buried 3 compliance portals deep in a shared drive no one remembered existed. But I remembered, because I'd built half of it. There it was, in a PDF titled Zenith Core Integration Governance, Final V9 PDF, because of course it was. Clause 9.3.4, Joint Authority Protocol. I stared at it for a long time. Back then, it hadn't felt like a power move. Just another line in a sea of cross-functional garbage I had to draft at 2 a.m., while legal was too busy trying to decipher which international compliance standard superseded which. The company was hemorrhaging contractors. Leadership was rotating faster than a ceiling fan in a Florida swamp. I was the only one still sober enough to realize we needed a fallback mechanism for deal continuity. So I wrote it. Clean. Surgical. Boring enough that no one questioned it. And now, years later, it was the grenade sitting in Brent's pocket. Pin intact, but barely. I scheduled a meeting with a friend in legal. Casual, off the record. We met in the break room under the guise of needing clarity around legacy contract overlap, which is code for, I need you to read this without asking why. She took one look and raised an eyebrow. Did you write this? I shrugged. A long time ago. She tilted her head. You're the lead signatory on the Zenith Core Charter. If they terminate you mid-negotiation, Clause 9.3.4 holds unless the client ratifies someone else. I know. She looked at me for a long second. So what's your play? Nothing, I said, sipping my burnt coffee. I'm just catching up on old homework. We didn't speak again, but I saw her rereading the clause 3 times before closing her laptop. That afternoon, Brent forwarded me a revised pitch deck for our final Zenith Core alignment, asking for feedback. I sent back one note. Looks great. Consider softening slide 12. Market capture might come off aggressive. Maybe collaborative growth pathway? He replied, Love that. You're such a team player. That night, I began crafting the sealed envelope. Inside, my signed resignation. Dated, notarized, and a printout of Clause 9.3F4. I annotated it lightly, just enough to make the interpretation bulletproof. Cited precedent from another case I vaguely remembered from my compliance nerd days. Included my email from the year it was signed, confirming its ratification from both sides. No melodrama, no manifesto. Just facts. I sealed the envelope and tucked it into my desk drawer. I wasn't going to run to HR. I wasn't going to leak anything. I was going to wait. Let Brent dance on his little stage. Let him believe he'd outmaneuvered me. Because the thing about being underestimated? It's the closest thing to invisibility. And invisible people can go places others can't. Like straight to the kill switch, without being noticed. Zenith Core's mid-cycle update call was supposed to be my arena. I had built the agenda, prepped the data, coached our analysts, even rewritten half of Brent's bullet points so they wouldn't sound like a middle school motivational poster. The client's team was already on camera when we joined. Calm, polished, sharp. People who notice everything and forget nothing. I opened the meeting with a quick summary of progress, outlining where we stood on integration timelines and what still needed the client's review. I had barely made it through my second sentence when Brent leaned forward, lifted a single finger like he was about to bless the congregation, and cut me off. "Actually, Jennifer," he said with a patronizing laugh, "I think what you meant was that we're shifting away from that approach. Zenith Core, let me clarify. Our updated strategy prioritizes adaptive velocity and holistic synchronization. Jennifer's still catching up on the new perspective." The silence on the call was the kind that could bruise. Zenith Core's lead counsel blinked once, slowly. Their director of ops tilted her head like she had just watched someone fall down an escalator in slow motion. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't risk the smallest twitch. Rage has a temperature, and mine was absolute zero. "That's not what I said," I replied evenly. Brent laughed again, louder. "No worries, I'll take this one." And with that, he launched into a rambling monologue that contradicted half the groundwork we'd laid over the past year. He promised deliverables we had explicitly ruled out due to compliance constraints. He redefined timelines so aggressively the ops director began taking notes like she was preparing evidence. He called our fallback plan cute. At one point he said, "This is why leadership's stepping in, to provide, big picture oversight." Zenith Core's counsel raised an eyebrow. Was leadership not already aligned on the existing framework? Jennifer's documentation was consistent. Brent waved a hand. "We're evolving past that." I should have burned the building down with my mind right there. Instead, I smiled. Calm. Controlled. The sort of smile serial killers probably practice in the mirror. After the meeting, he clapped me on the back, literally, like we were teammates at softball practice. "Great energy today. Let's sync later so I can walk you through the new direction." I went to my desk, logged what needed logging, sent what needed sending. Then I waited. 2 days later, a calendar invite appeared. HR, mandatory check-in. I didn't need a psychic. I brought nothing but my badge. The HR rep, the same neutral-faced observer from the quick sync, read from a script with all the warmth of a voicemail menu. "Jennifer, due to ongoing concerns about team collaboration and communication alignment, your employment is terminated effective immediately." I nodded once. Understood. A man from IT hovered behind her like a bouncer at a club I wasn't rich enough to get into. My laptop was taken gently, respectfully, like they'd found it abandoned in a parking lot. My badge was deactivated before I even placed it on the table. By the time I reached my desk, my email had already logged me out. 15 minutes. That's all it took for 9 years to vanish into a black screen. I packed slowly, deliberately. My mug, my pen set, the notebook with color-coded tabs that had gotten me through 5 product lines, 3 mergers, and a CFO who thought CSV was a sports league. The office lawyer, Mark, happened to walk by as I zipped the last compartment of my bag. He froze, guilty, sympathetic, confused. Lawyers always know when something is off. They can smell administrative rot before anyone else. I turned to him, expression neutral, voice steady. "Mark, before I go, this is for you." I handed him the sealed envelope. Thick, heavy, weighty with intention. He looked at it like it might explode. "Jennifer, what is this?" "Continuity," I said. "You'll understand soon." And I walked out. No tears, no yelling, no dramatic speeches in the lobby or parking lot, just the kind of stillness that settles right before a lightning strike. Beautiful, quiet, and absolutely deadly. Because I wasn't leaving defeated. I was leaving loaded. I didn't answer a single call. Not from the receptionist who left a shaky voicemail asking if I'd happen to know where the updated deliverable timeline spreadsheet was. Not from Brent's assistant, who sent 3 consecutive emails with the subject line, "Just checking." Not even from Mark, the company lawyer, whose final text read, "Jennifer, we need to talk. Urgently." Let them stew. Let them marinate in the soup they seasoned with their own smugness. I bought myself a cheap burner phone, muted my inbox, and disappeared into what I called my post-corporate hibernation, aka the guest bedroom of my cousin's house, with blackout curtains and a French press that could resurrect the dead. From that quiet cave, I watched from a distance. Zenith Core's public updates dried up. The joint press release scheduled for Thursday never launched. A LinkedIn update about the strategic expansion quietly vanished. A polite line of inquiry began making the rounds. "Where's Jennifer?" I wasn't on the Slack channels anymore. My profile picture had been wiped. My email bounced. And yet, my name kept surfacing in meeting transcripts. In one virtual session, Zenith Corps' lead counsel asked a simple question. Was Jennifer reassigned, or did she resign? Brent said, transitioned. The counsel paused. And was this transition communicated via formal clause override? Brent blinked. Via what now? The silence that followed was so long the meeting log shows it as a 5-second audio void. Someone on their side must have gone digging, because 2 hours after that meeting ended, Mark finally unsealed the envelope I gave him. Inside was a 3-piece gift set, my formal resignation letter, dated the morning of my termination, with notarized proof of submission. A copy of Clause 9.3.4 from the Zenith Corps Charter, printed on firm letterhead. My annotations. I had footnoted relevant precedent cases, including one from a 2013 pharmaceutical merger, where the exact clause had triggered a legal delay when a mid-negotiation team reshuffle led to contractual ambiguity. That case settled out of court for $86 million in damages because someone thought authorized signatory was just a formality. It wasn't. Mark read the packet 3 times. Then he called the CEO. Then he called Brent. According to someone still on the inside, bless their encrypted signal updates, the next internal meeting was 30 minutes of exploratory panic. Because here's the thing, the JAP clause wasn't a suggestion. It was binding. And it said, clearly, undeniably, that in the event of a mid-negotiation termination, all binding signature authority would remain vested in the original deal lead until both the client and the company agreed on a new authorized party. Meaning, the deal was frozen. Brent couldn't sign. The CEO couldn't sign. Legal couldn't even rubber stamp a revision until Zenith Corps signed off on a new lead. And guess who hadn't done that? That's right, Zenith Corps. Why? Because no one had told them I was gone. They'd been assuming I was just off the grid, maybe on sabbatical, maybe deep in internal alignment. No one had the guts to say, we fired her. And now they were caught holding a $280 million deal with no legal pen in the room. Inside my cousin's spare bedroom, I sipped coffee and reread the last clause of my annotation. Per Section 9.3.4, authority does not transfer automatically upon internal restructuring or personnel removal. Only by mutual ratification, acknowledged in writing, shall new authorization be granted. Mutual ratification. In writing. There was no such writing, and unless I chose to ratify it, which I wouldn't, the deal wasn't going anywhere. From the outside, I was silent, absent, irrelevant. But behind the curtain, I was the ghost in their machine, the one they built the deal around, and the only one who still had the keys. Brent, being Brent, didn't believe the rules applied to him. A week after my departure, he showed up to the Zenith Corps status review with that same overgroomed confidence and a fresh haircut that looked like it had been shaped with a ruler. He swaggered into the Zoom room in a pressed button-down and immediately launched into a stream of enthusiastic corporate babble. Great to see everyone. We're excited to accelerate Phase 2. Let's get those next stage commitments locked in and keep this momentum going, yeah? On camera, Zenith Corps' legal counsel didn't even blink. Brent, she said coolly, before we proceed, we'll need confirmation of updated signatory authority per Clause 9.3.4. He paused, just long enough to reveal the crack. Right, of course. That's just a formality. Our internal team's handling that. No, she said. It isn't a formality. The ops director leaned forward. We don't move forward until authorized signatory status is documented. As of today, that remains with Jennifer, per the binding protocol. Brent blinked. She's no longer with the company. Then you have a problem, said Zenith Corps' counsel, because without her ratification or a co-signed update from both parties, you're operating outside agreed legal terms. Silence. Like a magician yanking a rabbit from a hat and revealing it's already dead. Inside sources told me Brent's expression curdled like old yogurt. He stammered, tried to pivot to alternative oversight workflows, but Zenith Corps didn't budge. Their tone turned frostier with each syllable. This is a $280 million commitment, their rep said. We don't wing it on signatures. That call ended in 15 minutes flat. Brent didn't even get to the part where he'd rebranded our implementation schedule as the Velocity Engine. Back at headquarters, the spiral began. The CEO tried to call me. Twice. I watched his number light up the burner phone I'd duct-taped to the wall. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that started with, "Hey Jennifer, we just want to clear up a few loose ends," and ended with the kind of forced chuckle people make when they're trying not to scream in a parking garage. Legal had an emergency meeting within the hour. The findings? Nothing had changed. Clause 9.3.4 was airtight. I was still, in the eyes of the law and the client, the only human being on Earth with the authority to finalize that deal. To override it, two things were required: my explicit written consent to transfer authority, Zenith Corps' co-signature confirming the new lead they had neither. Worse, my resignation letter made it clear that I had not transferred anything. Mark, the lawyer, apparently asked the room, "Did anyone talk to Jennifer before this happened?" Brent, in his infinite brilliance, replied, "We assumed standard protocol applied." To which legal whispered the most damning phrase you can utter in corporate America: "You assumed wrong." My phone lit up with texts from Mark. "Please call me. We can work something out." Then, "Jennifer, this is serious." Then, "They're trying to contact the board." I ignored everyone, because I knew what was happening. The ice was cracking. The deal, frozen. The client, skeptical. The leadership team spiraling. And me? I was at peace. I'd gone from being erased to being irreplaceable, and all it took was one overlooked clause and the arrogance of men who thought power came from their titles, not the paperwork that held their kingdom together. But I wasn't done yet. I didn't just want vindication. I wanted them to squirm. And lucky for me, the next quarterly board meeting was coming up, and I had just received a very interesting invitation. The invitation came as a DM on LinkedIn from a name I hadn't seen in 3 years, Lila Morrison. Back in the early days of the Zenith Corps expansion, she'd been their director of strategic implementation, a no-nonsense operator with a talent for slicing through bureaucracy like a hot knife through PowerPoint. We'd survived 2 M&A disasters together and still managed to get drinks afterward. She'd left just before the final integration phase to consult and breathe again. Her words, not mine. Her message was brief. "Hey stranger, heard you're a free agent. Need a sanity check over coffee? I've got questions about a mutual friend." I replied, "I don't do leaks, but I do like coffee." We met at a quiet cafe 2 suburbs outside the city, one of those places with no Wi-Fi and a handwritten menu. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a look of mild amusement that told me she already knew half the story. "Let me guess," I said, sliding into the booth. "They haven't told Zenith Corps anything meaningful." She raised an eyebrow. "You'd be amazed how many ways a company can say realignment without actually answering a damn question." I didn't trash Brent, didn't drag the CEO, didn't say a word about the clause, the chaos, or the panicked voicemails now hitting my inbox at 2 a.m. like desperate Morse code. Instead, I asked, "What do they think the deal's supposed to do long-term?" She blinked, then smiled. I laid it out clean. The way we'd designed the pilot to scale globally without fracturing regional workflows. How the sandbox testing parameters actually anticipated the regulation Zenith Corps' legal was just now flagging. How the full implementation schedule hinged on a single Q3 node that, if missed, would snowball delays for a year. All facts, all public, all documents Brent never understood, never read, never even knew existed. Lila leaned back slowly. "You're not helping them, you're helping us." I shrugged. "I'm just giving context." She nodded, then pulled out her phone. And context changes everything. 3 days later, I got word from an old analyst friend, still stuck inside the firm, that Zenith Corps was reevaluating key aspects of the agreement. No one knew exactly what that meant, but Brent's face apparently had gone white in the Monday status meeting. He'd tried to smooth it over, called it temporary turbulence, suggested the client just needed a vision refresh. But finance had already flagged the paused payment timeline, and legal had confirmed that without proper signatory restoration, they couldn't even issue the next phase contract for review. And behind closed doors, Zenith Corps had invited me to a private offsite as an external transition advisor. Not a job, not a contract, just insight. "Totally informal," Lila had said over the phone. "We just want to make sure we're not missing anything." I went, wore gray slacks, no makeup, and brought nothing but a notebook. They didn't ask about the clause. They asked about strategy, about the reasoning behind the timelines, about the layered contingencies we'd built into the escalation tiers, about whether the velocity engine, that dumb little term Brent kept pushing, was even viable with the compliance lag in Tier 2 markets. I answered calmly, logically, briefly. Then I left. I didn't offer to come back. I didn't ask for a job. But I knew. The value I provided in one quiet afternoon had done more than Brent's last 4 months of puffed-up optimism and word salad. And word travels fast in corporate corridors. By Friday, I received a screenshot of a Slack message Brent had sent to the executive thread. It read, "Zenith Core seems hesitant. Might be helpful to re-engage Jennifer for continuity." The CEO had replied with a single period. I didn't laugh. I just sat on my porch, mug of tea in hand, and watched the sun drop behind the tree line. Because the best kind of revenge isn't loud, it's the kind where they have to say your name again, carefully this time, like it's a prayer or a plea. The quarterly board meeting kicked off with all the fanfare of a forced wedding. Suits packed into the glass box of a room on the 42nd floor. Bottles of sparkling water arranged like props. A tray of uneaten croissants sat under a dome like no one wanted to be the first to admit they were hungry or human. Brent stood at the head of the table, clicking through his slide deck with all the confidence of a man who believed fonts could solve problems. Slide 10 outlines the key timeline realignment for the Zenith Core rollout, he said, gesturing like a cruise director. As you can see, the temporary stall has given us a chance to revisit core delivery mechanisms, which, if properly leveraged, could drive even greater long-term integration. One of the board members coughed. Another looked down at his printed agenda like it was a treasure map he'd misread. The CEO sat rigid, jaw clenched so tightly you could hear his molars grinding between slides. Brent was halfway through a chart labeled Optimization Curve, Client Engagement Phase 2, when the conference room door clicked open. Zenith Core's lead counsel stepped in. Not virtually, in person. That alone should have dropped the room temperature 10 degrees. She didn't sit, didn't smile. Just opened a slim black folder and placed it gently on the table like a warrant. "I apologize for the interruption," she said calmly, "but I believe this meeting involves our mutual business interests." The CEO stood halfway, unsure whether to bow or bolt. "Of course, absolutely. We appreciate your presence." She cut him off with a look. Then, "Before any strategic delays or realignments are discussed, I need a verbal record of the following. Who is currently authorized to finalize this contract per Clause 4.7.2 of the Zenith Core Joint Implementation Charter?" Every head turned to Brent. He froze, mouth slightly open, eyes scanning the room like a man searching for an escape hatch. Mark, the company's lawyer, fumbled his legal binder, flipping pages with fingers that had gone visibly white. The CEO leaned in. "Clause 4.7.2? That's the JAP clause?" The counsel didn't flinch. "Yes, the one governing mid-negotiation signatory authority during transitional employment events." Brent coughed. "Well, obviously we've transitioned leadership, but kept continuity through existing workflows. So, she echoed. Who is the ratified signatory?" Mark whispered something to the CEO. The CEO's eyes darted to Brent. "Jennifer," the lawyer finally mumbled. "As per the clause, Jennifer is still the recognized signatory." Brent stepped back, blinking. "But she doesn't even work here anymore?" "Which is why the clause exists," she replied, "to prevent exactly this from derailing client operations. Until both parties confirm a replacement in writing, the original signatory holds authority." A silence fell across the room that felt holy. One board member, a retired CFO with a comb-over and murder in his eyes, leaned forward. "Are you telling us this deal is frozen because you fired the one person legally allowed to close it?" Mark cleared his throat. "That's accurate." The Zenith Core Council nodded once. "Then we'll await Jennifer's participation or a mutual ratification. Until then, we consider this deal paused." She closed her folder, turned, and left the room without another word. Brent stood motionless, the next slide frozen behind him. It read, "Strategic Synergies, Q3 and beyond." The irony was so thick you could have used it to frost a cake. The CEO didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally, "Fix this." Brent didn't respond, because the truth had finally settled over the table like a fog made of regret. The woman they had dismissed, discredited, and discarded was now the only person who could save their biggest deal. And she wasn't in the room. Not yet. Mark opened the envelope again like it was a cursed artifact. Same resignation letter. Same clause. Same tidy set of annotated references I'd highlighted in yellow all those months ago. His eyes darted between the words like he was hoping something had magically changed since the last time he read them. But nothing had changed. Not the date, not the language, not the fact that I and I alone held the pen they needed. And then it happened. The laugh. It slipped out of Mark like a cough, short and dry, but then it grew. Not manic, not joyful. Just bitter recognition bleeding through exhaustion. A lawyer's laugh. A man who had finally found the bottom of the barrel and realized he was the one who helped dig it. "You fired," he said, still chuckling. "The only person authorized to close your biggest deal." The boardroom went still. The Zenith Corps counsel tilted her head, not with confusion, but with boredom. Like she'd seen this kind of incompetence before, probably during mergers gone sideways, or during those rare, glorious moments when a company outsmarts itself into ruin. She tapped her fingers once against the table. Then, like a conductor cueing a final note, she asked quietly, "So, who here can sign this?" No one answered. Not Brent, whose pupils were now the size of pinpricks. Not the CEO, who had his hand over his mouth like he might actually throw up on the quarterly projections. Not the CFO, who had started quietly flipping through the governance binder like it might hold a time machine. And not Mark, who just leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. Across the screen, a Zoom window remained quietly open in the bottom corner. Mine. "Courtesy observer," the invite had said. That's what Zenith Corps called it. I hadn't asked to join. They'd offered. Out of transparency, they said. Out of respect. I didn't unmute. I didn't interrupt. I just watched. Wearing a charcoal gray sweater. Hair tied back. No makeup. No flair. Just a slow, measured expression, and the sort of calm that terrifies men who expect women to weep when wronged. I watched Brent try to speak, fail, then turn to the CEO as if words might spontaneously spawn in his throat if someone just gave him permission. I watched the CEO slump back, the edges of his voice fraying. "We didn't think it would be binding." The client's counsel didn't blink. "Then you should have read it." I still didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't gloat, just smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just complete. Because that was it. The moment. Everything they'd built, the deck, the timelines, the press strategy, the executive realignment, was now ashes. They had outmaneuvered themselves. And I hadn't needed to raise my voice, file a suit, start a whisper campaign. All I had done was write a clause, keep the receipts, and wait. The deal? On ice. The board? Furious. Brent? Exposed. Me? Exactly where I needed to be. Unbothered. Untouchable. And absolutely, irrevocably necessary.